So Games Workshop have addressed the leaks and given us some new details as to the Nightbringer, Celestians and the Raptors. There's just a hint that the Warp Talons might be safe. Besides that, there's been some tournament drama with a player disqualified due to taking an extra model along. There's yet more Grey Knight lore weirdness, with the Terminus Decree not being the only wild thing in their codex, and at least one event has placed some restrictions on Death Guard and Knights in an effort to do a bit of community balance. Time for a roundup of some 40k news over the past few days. Hello and welcome back to Warspecs Tactics, where today we're back for another small Warhammer news roundup. A whole bunch of things I didn't really want to make an entire video about all to themselves, though I was still interested and wanted to talk about. Let's start with Games Workshop's new reveals of the new units and go on to the other stuff. The other day we perhaps had some surprisingly big model reveals from an upcoming Kill Team box set. Basically there was a Spanish dossier of a Kill Team box that went around and it revealed some new Chaos Raptors, some new Adeptus Auroratus Celestians, and perhaps most spectacularly of all, a new Nightbringer model. As they often do, Games Workshop have decided to follow the top with a proper model reveal. If the pictures are out there on the internet, then they often choose to double down and probably showcase them on their own websites. They don't literally always do this, but it seems to be quite a good tactic as basically the cat's out of the bag at this point, and they may as well have more publicity and more people going to their site for the news. As a result, we've got some pictures of the new miniatures that leaked out, and a few more limited details as to the kits themselves, though as the articles focus on Kill Team quite a bit, the main focus hasn't been the options on the squads, unfortunately. It seems that the miniatures were all part of a box set called Kill Team Shadowhunt, and this was something that I sort of slightly suspected at the time, though there wasn't really too much to say either way, but it does seem that this isn't the next Kill Team box set, but it's the third one out of a sequence set on their Necron world. The first one is that Kill Team Tomb world, which has some Necron terrain. They said that that's going to be coming out at least fairly shortly, sometime within the next few weeks. That's got the Necrons versus the Death Watch they showed off at their big summer preview. Then after that there's a mystery one that we don't know the identity yet, but the one that leaks is from all the way in the future. Kill Team Shadowhunt with the Celestians versus Raptors. Compared with a bunch of other similar Kill Team sets, this one actually seems kind of light compared with a bunch. Games Workshop's had quite a lot of box sets where they've crammed a lot of stuff in, as well as the Kill Teams themselves, extra squads or characters, and big amounts of terrain. For this one though, it looks like it's quite a model light one. It's just 5 Raptors, 1 Chaos Lord, and 10 Celestian Insdiants they're called. It doesn't appear that there's any terrain in there, they just have some double-sided game boards, and despite being in the rules section, it doesn't look like the Nightbringer is featuring in this box. I was suspecting, seeing as he had basically non-player operative rules, it was going to be a very weird release with a Nightbringer in the box alongside the 2 Kill Teams, but I think it's probably for the best for everyone that he doesn't come out that way, given that they tend to underproduce these box sets massively. I guess so far they haven't had enormous amounts of focus on the upcoming Tomb World box set, and I guess we'll hear more about that in the week in which it actually comes out. The story for this one though is that there's a road psyker turned prophet known as the Harbinger, and the story is the Sisters of Battle are setting out to take him down, and presumably the Night Lord's getting involved. The box set doesn't look like it's coming out for quite some time though. They stated that it's coming out around about the same time as the Nightbringer, who's not going to be coming out until all the way in 2026. In any case, for our distant future preview, the sisters will be getting these Celestian Insdiants they're called. We had a whole bunch of at least fairly good photos yesterday, maybe not quite as blurry as some leaks out there, though obviously it's nice to get some better ones from Games Workshop themselves. Basically elite sisters with a bit more bling than the average battle sisters, and some loincloths and robes and things, and some iron crowns on their heads. In the Kill Team dossier, there were rules for fielding 9 of them in a squad. You got 1 Sister Superior and 8 models, but fortunately it does look like there's 10 models in the box set. I hadn't realised it at the time, but apparently they have done that with a few other Kill Teams before. Some of the earlier ones had 10 models in the box set, but you could only field 9 of them in the in-game rules. As expected from the hints that we got on the dossier, it does seem like they're an anti-psyker specialist veteran unit. Games Workshop's lore snippets for them said that they train themselves to effectively fight within the null aura of their weapons, and on their heads and helmets they wear iron crowns that apparently allow them to focus their faith to resist witchcraft somehow. I guess if the Adeptus Auroratus really want one specific psyker taken down, they could deploy a squad of these. I guess both their range and melee weapons will be getting some anti-psyker keywords if they've got Condemner bolt pistols as their standard pistol loadouts. Otherwise, besides there being 10 models in the kits, there weren't a huge amount of new clarifications as to what they can take. We already knew that their base loadout are those null maces and the Condemner bolt pistols. 2 can take hand flamers, the Sister Superior can take an Inferno pistol, and there's 2 Blessed Blades in the units for a bit of melee punch, one of them paired with a shield. There's also a Presidium shield and some specialist kits that a few of the Kill Team operatives can take. It might get some 40k rules representation or not, but overall looks like quite a fun kit. Maybe just a bit surprising they went for another more mainly melee sort of Celestian kind of role as opposed to a ranged one. As plenty of people have pointed out, several of the models could make some pretty great budget sisters character options. The one with the staff and the speakers on the back certainly feels like she could be done as a dialogist, and a fair few of the others feel like they could fit for minor or major characters, perhaps particularly if there's some conversion work. Overall, it feels like they've been broadly quite well received. Quite a long time to wait before they turn up yet though. Before we move on to the Raptors, the Nightbringer and more, I'll just give a quick shout out to today's video sponsor in ObjectiveMarkers.com, who, as the name implies, basically makes some faction specific objective markers that could be good for Warhammer 40k. These guys are a fairly recent UK based company. They ship to the UK and USA, and their main offering are these: some flexible clear silicon objective markers where you have a 40mm central marker measured out for you, and then you have a wider disc that extends 3 inches round it, so you can basically really easily see which miniatures are in range of the objective and which ones aren't. They're quite common things as a Warhammer 40k gaming accessory. Loads of people have made their own versions of them, though I think these ones are quite nice in adding a bit more of a subtle faction theme, but not taking too much away from the battlefield itself, given that they're clear, so you can still see whatever terrain that you're playing on through them. The objective markers come in sets of 6, they're generally £25 or $35, and they've got some good ones to represent a whole bunch of factions out there. They've got ones for your Golden Guardians, bugs from beyond the galaxy, and your Power Armoured Warriors, and then more for the Force of Chaos, Greenskins, and your Ancient Xenos out there. As part of their introductory offer when they're shipping these out, they also have some nice dice included with each set as well. They do have a few other things on their web store which I'll link below. For example, they make some clear plastic ruined terrain bases to mark things out for area terrain. In any case though, a big thank you to them for sponsoring the video. Feel free to check them out, links down in the video description. Back to the 4 model reveals though, and the next squad, as we know, are the Raptors. They're called the Murder Wing, or very appropriate for them. And as the Kill Team dossier stated, it does seem that they're fielded as a Chaos Lord backed up by 5 regular Raptors. Though for their kit it does look like you only get 5 of them in the big box set, unlike say the Necrons vs Deathwatch big one, where the Deathwatch kill team comes in a set of 10, basically 2 sets of 5 with dual builds. They're not doing the same for the Raptors though, you just get the 1 set of them in the box, and I guess that means they'll be sold the same way separately. From the kill team rules, it looks like the Lord was mandatory. You started with him and then added Raptors to it, so it does make me wonder how it will be packaged. I certainly hope that the Lord wouldn't be in the Raptor box sets to increase the overall cost. That could be annoying if people say wanted multiple boxes of the new Raptors and didn't want to get multiple Chaos Lords alongside. Then maybe they'll do a sort of split offering, perhaps one offering for kill team and then a repackaging for 40k with just the new Chaos jump packs. One concern that people had was whether or not Warp Talons might be in the box set or not. We knew there was going to be one from the Kill Team previews, though there weren't any more builds shown of them, and given Games Workshop's treatment of things like the Deathwing Command Squad, where the Deathwing Knights got redone but the dual build got done away with, I feel like it was reasonable enough to be nervous. It does seem from one of the pictures out of their teaser video though that you can build at least 2 Warp Talons from the box set, and I guess maybe the really heavily mutated guy might count as one as well. The guy on the left of the screen is the Chaos Lord. You can see a Warp Talon on the front right, and then also another Warp Talon in the background. Feels like at least if there's 2 of them that you're able to field this way, it probably implies that the Warp Talons are surviving as a unit, and they're still going to be an option that you can field as a dual build one as before, rather than going to Legends or anything. Beyond the kill team squad size and the fact that Warp Talons still seem to be a thing, they didn't really reveal anything particularly new compared with what had been revealed in the dossier. From the options that we could see there was a Power Fist or Power Sword on the champion, and he can take a Plasma Pistol, and then that model has the dual build for the guy on the left here. It looks like he's got a heavy chain axe, and he's listed as a Depredator. A bit of a weird name there, maybe they're trying to go for Depraved Predator, but does sound a bit on the silly side I think. Then the special weapon guy can either take a Melter Weapon or a Plasma or Flamer, one can take a Power Spear, and the very very heavily mutated one is called a Curse Claw. Some people still like that miniature, and could be good for the Word Bearers perhaps. I feel like it's the one that's drawn the most attention. Not everyone's a fan of every single limb being hyper mutated. I wonder whether or not he's going to have a dual build option that looks a bit more normal with some regular limbs. In any case, between all the new gear, it looks like the standard Raptor squad might just be a little bit more threatening than it was before. If you can have a Power Fist, a heavy chain axe, plus a Power Spear in the unit, and potentially on top of whatever the Curse Claw does and a special weapon, then you're packing quite a lot of threat into a Jump Chaos squad. So maybe there could be a chance they're a bit more viable as mainline damage dealers. Finally, for the kill team box, before we talk about the Nightbringer, I'll just mention that it looks like there was a split terrain sort of layout. One of the gimmicks for this one, for the kill team rules, is that it gives you rules for basically having models ascend from the catacombs to fight on the surface, or descend into the Necron tomb world infrastructure below. So I guess you'd have access points for either fighting over Volca's terrain, or the tomb world terrain that comes out in kill team tomb world. Could be an interesting enough idea to shake up the formula, I suppose. Talking of Necrons and Tomb Worlds though, the most major reveal out of any of these was the Nightbringer's new and rather spectacular miniature. It is kind of nice to see him outside of a blurry and grainy picture, and in general his model seems to have gone down really quite well as a new Necron centerpiece. He's got a great big scythe held aloft, the drapes swirling around him once more, a cloak that ends in a sort of digital pixelated effect that the Void Dragon had going on as well, and a couple of scarab swarms swirling around him borne on by lightning. They feel like maybe the most major elements that a few people have criticised. They said that he's billed for 2026 in the reveal trailer, and it kind of makes me wonder whether or not he was due for a reveal show sometime in November or December time perhaps, or feels like there's a pretty reasonable chance he could have even been meant to be a Christmas Day reveal. I think he's an appropriate enough centerpiece miniature with enough size and stature in the lore that he could have fit the bill there. In 2026 it might mean that he might tie in with any sort of end edition campaign that they come out with. The Arcs of Omen ones were all focused around characters, and some lore around the Nightbringer would certainly be cool. And we know as per yesterday that he's basically the final boss battle for the kill team narrative. When Games Workshop have quite this big a centerpiece model leaked quite so early, it does make me feel a little bit of a shame for the hype machine that they have going on. Any sort of build up of mysterious teasers will be rather easy to work out what they're alluding to now. For the model reveals though, nice to see him in a much better photo, and they gave us a size comparison to the previous one. Massively beefed up like the Void Dragon was. It looks like he's on a similar sort of size and stature to the Void Dragon when you count his scythe held above his head. Like the other Katani, looks like he'd be a challenge to transport, and I think his base might be a little bit bigger than the Void Dragon's, at least compared with the 40mm one that the older Nightbringer is on. They've got a few more pictures, and one of him zoomed into a fair few different bits. The twisted spectre of death that is the core body of the Katana himself seems to be inlaid with some Necron glyphs and straight lines and things, and seems that the Necron tier subreddit seem to be rather interested in those feet pics for some reason. Overall, looks like he's going to be a really popular model when he comes out. Probably best that he's not locked to a kill team box set, and they did also confirm that he's going to be getting a new datasheet for Warhammer 40k. I do kind of wonder whether or not he really needs one, to be honest. He's already got the stat line of a massive, great big tanky Catan. Kind of hard to imagine that they're going to make him into an even more deadly threat. I suppose they could give him some more movement or something if they wanted him to glide across the battlefield a bit faster. If so, though, I wouldn't be too surprised if they gave him a points rise. Currently the Necron Catan have masses of might and power, though are rather held back by just having a 6-inch movement, and that can make them a bit cumbersome to get into the fight. I suppose another potential change could be to give some sort of profile for those scarabs to attack, given that they're a more prominent feature than on the old one, where they just had like one or two. In any case though, let me know what you think of the Nightbringer. Would you be tempted to get the model, and what do you think they might do with his rules? Moving on, Games Workshop's new model reveals aside, let's talk about a few of the other things that have been going on. One thing that's generated a whole bunch of discussion around the internet is some tournament drama with a Helbrute recently. I feel like whenever there's some sort of potential cheating that happens and the player in question happens to go undefeated at a grand tournament, that's always a recipe for stirring up a bunch of drama. Apparently this happened at the Lone Star Open, a big tournament in Texas of around about 300 players. As a result, really quite a lot of the higher placing ones went undefeated, and the player who placed in third was playing Chaos Space Marines. After the fact, it turned out that people spotted he'd basically gone over in points on his list, and the thing that seemed to be different was that there was a Helbrute in the list that wasn't paid for. A fairly big meaningful model, and really quite a pivotal one to Pact-bound Zealots, as he has an aura buff that makes those critical hits on a 5+ get far more effective. Sounds like the extra Helbrute was only spotted after the fact. No one who he played noticed the extra 130 point unit sneaking in, which is maybe a little bit surprising, but I'm sure the vast majority of people don't go through and get out their calculator or anything and check their opponent's points, particularly if they've played through multiple rounds. You would have expected it to be caught at some point. After it was caught / pointed out, sounds like the player in question posted an apology, claimed it was a mistake, and asked for their place to be withdrawn and placed at the bottom of the rankings, which then happened. Frontline Gaming then did that, and it came out with a statement saying that the player has voluntarily chosen to not attend competitive events for a year, but stopped short of having a bit more of a firm stance against cheating. And between all that, it's just basically generated a whole bunch of discussion on all sides. Potentially the most annoying thing for people who went to play Warhammer at that event is that retrospectively they can't adjust to see what would have happened if players hadn't lost to this guy. As particularly in the later rounds, it basically means multiple people would have been knocked out of contention of winning the event, as they would have gone undefeated up to playing and losing to this list. It seems that people aren't particularly keen to take this as an accidental mistake. It rarely seems to happen at a high tournament level, and there do seem to be at least a few anecdotes flying around that this player's had bad form in the past. Obviously nothing I could confirm or deny personally though. Some were disappointed that Frontline Gaming didn't make a bit more of a firm statement against cheating and impose some sort of penalty or ban themselves as opposed to allowing the player to voluntarily withdraw or whatever. Overall though, it's just never a great look if one of the players at the top of an event hasn't been playing fair, both for the people who happen to play them and for the event organisers, I guess. If it was deliberate though, it does seem like a very illogical thing to do, as if you just place mid-table in the event, then it sort of feels a bit pointless to go about cheating. And if you win the event or place high enough that people notice your list, then you're almost certainly going to get caught after the fact when people take a look at the list. Another couple of things that caught my attention on the Grey Knight subreddit over the week were that it seems that the Terminus Decree isn't the only Grey Knight law that seems a bit wild in the new codex. It still seems like maybe one of the craziest things. It was a slightly mysterious law reveal that they'd teased a bit, but then wound up revealing something maybe a bit different to the teasers, and basically saying that the Terminus Decree is apparently written by the Emperor, and states that if he happens to get off the Golden Throne for any reason, like ascending to be a warp entity, the Grey Knights have to go over there, fight through the custodies, and put him back. It certainly feels like quite a big deal for the law, and maybe one of the more firm hints talking about possibilities for resurrection of the Emperor. Either way, it's been much discussed as a kind of weird shift for Games Workshop to take, and inspired many memes, but it seems that it wasn't the only thing that had the Grey Knights doing all sorts of unusual stuff in their codex. Firstly, the Grey Knights are having a fair bit of trouble maintaining their numbers at the moment. They're super elite Space Marines to start with, having to recruit Psychers that are incorruptible to chaos. They've had lots of problems and lots of losses with the opening of the Great Rift. One fairly tiny lore snippet in the Codex basically stated that they've been attacking other Space Marine chapters to seize viable recruits. So attacking fellow Adeptus Astartes and other Imperial institutions apparently. Apparently they strike in secret and then hide all evidence of their murderous deeds. Though the Grey Knights themselves are a rather secretive and unknown force in the Imperium at large anyway. The Imperium fighting and declaring war itself to any capacity is a bit unusual within Warhammer 40k lore, even if it has happened in the past. It just feels a bit next level to be thinking of the Grey Knights just going after assets held by other Space Marine chapters, which even for the weakest chapters around generally tend to be no pushover. Just feels like if they were getting into any sort of open conflicts, they're probably going to take at least some casualties and just make the whole thing not worth it if you're losing valuable and trained up battle brothers, as opposed to aspirants that might not necessarily make the cut. Again, at least a fairly big deal, even if it's not too far out of the remit of what Grey Knights might be expected to do, and I guess gives some justification for Grey Knights fighting other Imperial factions on the tabletop. Perhaps the more intriguing lore snippet, though, was that someone seems to have stolen all the dead of the Grey Knights. They state that in a single night and entirely unobserved, all remains held within the dead fields of the Grey Knights has vanished without a trace, and the Grey Knights basically have no idea where they went, or what power could have been responsible for this supernatural theft, particularly given it's within the heart of their citadel, so she'll be about as safe as just about anywhere in the Imperium. From the way it's described, it sounds a lot more likely to be something supernatural, either the Emperor exerting some warp magic, or I guess some sort of fiendish machinations of the Chaos Gods to do something horrible. It just seems unlikely that anything physical could do that sort of thing without attracting attention. So it seems unlikely that Belisarius Core is just digging up all the Grey Knights to make some Primaris ones or something. Either way though, certainly feels like the sort of lore that could be a setup for something in the future. People are largely expecting a Grey Knight range refresh to happen in 11th edition, and this lore could potentially be part of that. It certainly sounds like it could be something along the lines of resurrected Imperial heroes, something between Legion of the Damned, Living Saints, or the Ghost Knights of Grandmaster Mordrak. That might be the guess if it is the Emperor resurrecting them, though I suppose if it's the Chaos Gods stealing them, it's probably going to be something altogether more horrible. Certainly could be interesting to see if it's got any sort of bearing on new miniatures, or the potential return of Caldor Drago. It seems fairly likely that there'll be a new balance pass for Warhammer 40k in the not too distant future, and in the meantime it's been Death Guard and Knights that have been stomping a lot of armies flat. It seems that at least one tournament has got a bit bored of that though. Hellstorm Wargaming's next grand tournament is planning to place some light restrictions on the three armies, certainly not banning them or anything as certain people were doing with the Mordaka detachment, but just doing a nudge to try and level up the playing field just a tiny bit. The ruling that they seem to have gone for are that Death Guard are unable to take more than 2 copies of any non-battle line datasheets, and they can't take Chaos Knight allies, and the Knight armies can't double up on Titanic Knight datasheets, so you couldn't spam multiple Knight Atropos for the Imperial Knights, or multiple dual Gatling despoilers and Infernal Lance for the Chaos. I feel like quite a lot of the time in the past, individual tournaments or organisations making balanced passes outside of Games Workshop has a bit more of a mixed reception, though for making things interesting for any one event, this certainly seems like a solid step in the right direction. Feels to me like it wouldn't affect the top level power of any of the factions enormously. They do have enough data sheets to fall back on to take interesting stuff still. And I guess it could just mean that you might need to think a little bit harder about lists and not take the exact same thing as has been winning all the other tournaments. I guess Death Guard could just be taking 2 of their feated bloat drones rather than the 3 with the heavy blight launchers, and Chaos and Imperial Knights might have to use a bit more of their roster. It feels to me it might be a little bit more on the restrictive side for the Chaos Knights than the Imperium with the data sheets that they have access to. Overall though, it definitely doesn't seem to be going too far and making the factions weak or anything like that, and while not literally everyone is a fan, it seems to be far more positive than negatively received. I guess by Games Workshop's normal balance timeline, it's probably not going to be too long before the balance changes happen anyway. It might be early September by Games Workshop's normal schedule. I feel like for the people who regularly play Death Guard and Knights on the tournament scene and things though, plenty of people will be happy to see some changes come sooner rather than later, though it doesn't look like Games Workshop is going to do an emergency balance pass at this stage. Finally, for a few more things, it looks like Captain Centos doesn't have any sorts of Legends rules. People have been picking him up in store and getting paint on him. Sometimes for these commemorative miniatures, they have a Legends datasheet or a downloadable one. Given that all of his war gear could be represented by a standard Space Marine Captain though, it seems pretty reasonable to use that datasheet. For Games Workshop's latest rumour engine, it doesn't look like it's anything Warhammer 40k, maybe looking like some sort of warped or mutated fox or wolf type thing. I saw some people suggesting that it could maybe be Sylvaneth, maybe something that's half forest creature and half tree perhaps. Finally for Warhammer 40k, there's a bunch of special edition books going on sale at some stage later this year. I don't think that any of these are new stories, but more repackaged in some of the fancy special edition limited things that tend to sell out very quickly. They all feature some extra new art and are signed by the authors, and some have some new content. I think they said the Assassinorum one that had a new short story excerpt in it. Could be of interest if you're a particular fan of Assassins, Sisters of Battle, or Eldari though. In any case, I'll leave this one there for now. Let me know your thoughts on all the stuff mentioned down in the comments below. What do you make of Games Workshop's full new model reveals, the Grey Knight new lore things, and the various tournament bits? As mentioned earlier, a big thank you to ObjectiveMarkers.com for sponsoring the video. Feel free to check them out if you'd like some fancy looking faction objectives, aiming to add a bit of theme onto the tabletop for different armies, and still be able to see the battlefield through the marker. There'll be links down in the video description below, and thanks to them for sponsoring this one. I'll leave that there for now though. Feel free to subscribe to Allspecs Tactics if you'd like to see more like this. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming, with new ones out just about every day. Finally, if you've been enjoying the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Allspecs Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description if you'd like to help support and keep the videos coming. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good or you'd just like to help support, the link's down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.